A few weeks ago, I did a critical thought on the topic of difficulty and how it relates to the progression and design of a title. And for this week's topic, we're going to be focusing on things from an accessibility standpoint, where a lot of developers and consumers get it wrong, and why it's actually quite hard to make an easy game. Difficulty and how it relates to accessibility is a very tough topic for a lot of developers. And over the last decade, with kind of growing discussions around accessibility and approachability, it has become a far more polarizing element. Some people saying that if a game doesn't have difficulty sliders, it's not accessible. Other people saying that no game needs difficulty sliders, they're just there to worsen a game. And the problem when it comes to sliders or just manipulating difficulty is that a lot of people get it wrong when it comes to what the actual impact of, easy, normal, hard, masochistic, cakewalk, any other different adjectives you can think of, and how it relates to gameplay. Because here is kind of the dirty little secret that at the end of the day, blanket difficulty sliders are the worst solution for video game accessibility. And I don't know if I'll get into trouble when I say that or not. But the problem is that when we are manipulating difficulty in very blanket ways like this, they're not affecting the gameplay loop or any of the mechanics of a title. Now, the footage you're seeing upper left is from Crypt of the Necrodancer. This is a rhythm-timed bass roguelike. And for those of you who are fans of the channel, you know that anything that is rhythmic or musical bass, I cannot play to save my life. I was going to show you some footage of BPM, which is a rhythmic bass first-person shooter. Think Doom meets Crypt of the Necrodancer, and I can't play that game. My brain does not work when it comes to anything musical based. So the reason why I brought this up is that there is not one difficulty slider that someone could create that would make me a better player at that game or BPM. You can have 50 different levels from, I don't know what, super beginner, just press a button to win, to, you need synesthesia in order to be able to play the game at that level. It wouldn't help me. And the reason why I bring this up is that when we talk about effective controls or effective ways of changing difficulty or making a game more accessible, it really comes down to the design of the game and what are the pain points and walls that are stopping someone from enjoying it. So a really good counterexample of this is the Legend of Zelda game. I believe it's from the Crypt of the Necrodancer developers. So what they did was they didn't have different difficulty settings, but they put in a feature that lets you turn off the need to match your movement and actions to the beats. And what happens is that the game simply turns into a turn-based Wii Go style roguelike. And I can play that one far better than I ever could with Crypt of the Necrodancer or BPM. And the point about that is this was a case of a developer understanding what are the hurdles to playing my game and how do I allow for more people to play it. And that is an amazing example of accessibility. Going back to the beginning, when I say that blanket difficulty settings are the worst form of accessibility, what we're talking about are games that are simply stat adjustments. So, easy mode, all enemies have 50% less health. Hard mode, all enemies have 50% more health. And you may think that developers don't do that, but they certainly do. I remember playing both Nier and Nier Automata, and they both had that kind of very polarizing difficulty. And the problem why this doesn't work is that when you don't change the mechanisms or the core gameplay with your difficulty, you are missing the pain points. And this is why, when I talk about games that really do a good job of difficulty, they build it or they integrate it into the gameplay experience. Whether this is covertly, by allowing you to choose different builds, or overtly, by letting you actually manipulate various elements of difficulty that change the game. One of my all-time favorite examples is The World Ends With You. That by making the game easier or harder, it actually changes what loot drops and how enemies behave. And you are rewarded more for making the game harder, but you can still play through this game on the easiest setting and see the entire story. And when you look at your game to figure out how things are being made easier or harder, it lets you get far more creative with how the difficulty works. And the reason why this is so important is that I see a lot of developers and consumers who still make this claim that if you have difficulty settings, your game is magically more accessible. But the problem is that if your game is annoying to play on normal, it's still going to be annoying to play on easy. And it'll be downright, frustrating to play on hard. And when developers ignore pain points or they try to use these band-aid fixes for their games, typically we get into that, echo chamber effect that people will say that your game is amazing and great and perfect when either A, they didn't really play the game, or B, they may have played it for like 20 minutes, oohed and awed at the difficulty settings, and then they stop playing. This is a case where I look at stuff like from BioWare, as we've joked before on the channel with the idea of BioWare magic, that they really haven't had that much magic. They've made good RPGs, but I have yet to play a game from BioWare that I enjoyed from a gameplay loop perspective, and it doesn't matter what difficulty setting I play them on. And RPGs in particular are very infamous about this kind of blanket use. And it's gotten to the point where I've had to, remind myself every time I play a CRPG, RPG, JRPG, any other RPG example you can think of, never play on hard mode. Because hard oftentimes just equal grind. That, yes, it is more challenging to fight enemies who do 2.5 times more damage, but it often means I have to do 3 to 5 times more grinding in order to compensate for it. And this is, again, the problem when it comes to using difficulty settings, sliders, buttons, modifiers, however you want to call it, when you're trying to make your game easier or harder. Because if you don't understand, once again, where people are struggling with your game, this is not going to help them. For instance, if you have a game, like another game that I'm playing right now is something like Iconfall, which is kind of like, it features a Paper Mario RPG or Super Mario RPG action command kind of interface. And the game allows you to change or, affect just how much you need to rely on that. I believe there is even an option to just turn on auto win. And while that may sound like a mulligan or a buy on trying to make your game more approachable, it is a way of allowing people who don't want to play a very challenging RPG to at least enjoy the charming story. Now, what they could have certainly have done is simply keep everything the same and just say, on easy mode, you have 5 times more health. On hard mode, enemies do 10 times more damage. But if you're not understanding where somebody could have trouble with your game, it's going to lead to this case where you do all this work with difficulty settings, and A, people just try, get frustrated with the rest of your game and quit, or they'll play on the wrong difficulty and say, this game is either too boring, it's dumb, or this game is just too frustrating, it's broken, and then you annoy everybody on both sides of the spectrum. So with that said, we're going to take a quick break, and when I come back, I want to talk about one of my personal favorite examples of using difficulty sliders. And if you're interested in more about game design and my thoughts on it, then check out my latest offering of game design books. For entry-level students, we have 20 Essential Games to Study, and then the Game Design Deep Dive series that takes an extensive look at different genres, with horror coming by the end of 2021. As I said in the last part, one of the most effective ways of building difficulty sliders or difficulty settings into your game is understanding what aspects you can change to make it either easier or more challenging for your players. And when you build things custom like that, it can lead to some very interesting designs and ultimately allows you to approach your game better for it. And my example for this piece is Way of the Passive Fist. This is one of those games I just like to talk about a lot in terms of its use of difficulty. So the footage that you're seeing right now, this is taken from the highest difficulty of the game, which is just Way of the Master. So how this works is that at the start of the game, you choose your difficulty from various modifiers. And the modifiers go beyond just more health or more or less damage. They affect the number of enemies you fight at any one time, the number of checkpoints that you have in between, and it also affects your mastery of the parry system. You see, when you're playing this game on the lower settings for parrying, as long as you parry anything or just any kind of time for your parrying, you're going to build up meter and do damage for your attacks or your blocks. On the highest settings, only perfect parrying will actually fill that meter up there. And the meter is important because it's the only way you're going to be able to use your super moves, which if you're playing or when you're at the boss fights, you need them in order to actually do decent damage to them. So in this aspect, it's a way of making the game harder, but it's really a way of forcing you to master the game. And that is a far better way of challenging somebody to play a game because you're not making the game just harder. You are essentially making it more interesting or rewarding mastery. So they could have done something and say that, oh, we're going to make the game harder by removing your ability to see the beats or see perfect parrying windows. But that would certainly make things more difficult, but it wouldn't make things more interesting to play. And we see this again with a lot of developers who either go too far in one direction, such as an easy mode where literally, nothing about the game has changed except you're immortal. And while that will certainly help people play your game, if again your game is still bad or frustrating to play, even making it so that you auto win every encounter may not still motivate somebody to play through your game. And again, what we find is that at the base level, your core gameplay loop should be enjoyable to play no matter the difficulty. And this is why some of the better games either A, don't have difficulty settings, or B, they go for more approachability in terms of their difficulty, understanding what the UI and UX, or user interface and user experience of their game is, and manipulating things along those lines. With Way of the Passive Fist, I can play this game on any combination of sliders and get a full experience for it. But you as the player can effectively choose where or what aspects of this game can be challenging, or you can make it easier. The Last of Us 2 is another example of this, and being able to manipulate down to each individual system how you want this game to play. If you're bad at stealth, make stealth easier. If you are amazing at, third-person shooting, make them more challenging if you want. And again, the point isn't to punish somebody for playing or, as people will say, cheapen the experience. It's simply to allow more people to be able to experience a game and play through it. And like I said, if your game is enjoyable on normal, it can certainly be enjoyable on easy or hard or nightmare, or however you want to describe it. Because at the end of the day, a bad game is going to be a bad game no matter how many sliders and difficulty options you have. And the motto or the point of lesson, or our lesson for today's video, is that if you want your game to work, you need to put in the work of understanding what elements are good and what elements can lead to frustration with your game. Because like I said, something that is bad or annoying in your game's design is going to be there on easy, normal, hard, hardcore, nightmare, masochistic, and any other difficulty sliders you want to combine or event. So, with that said, to wrap things up for today, for those of you watching this, can you think of examples of games that did a really good job of having different difficulties? Not just, again, making things easier, but making things harder in a meaningful way. Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thank you so much for watching this video. Be sure to check out our Discord and Patreon link down below, especially if you would like to see more long-form content here on the channel. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where is in the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.